Good afternoon, everyone. Over the last 2 decades, there has been a significant contribution coming from small biotechs, startups, and academic labs towards the development of innovative medicines. This has resulted in a number of avenues for partnerships and collaborations between these entities and the large pharma companies. Partnerships have become the cornerstone of success in drug development. It is my pleasure to introduce and moderate this important webinar being hosted jointly by IPA and Citeline Pharma, and to introduce the two distinguished speakers of this afternoon, Sarah Golpaker and Dr. Binu Philip. The topic that they will be discussing today is enhancing pharma R&D and innovation through strategic partnerships. Let me first introduce Sarah Golpaker, our first speaker. Sarah is a pharma product specialist from Citeline, formerly the Pharma Intelligence commercial team. She helps pharma companies define winning commercial strategies and works closely with clients to understand key competitor trends, market dynamics, and future SOCs to build effective strategic plans for target product profiling, indication prioritizing, market opportunity assessment, in and out licensing, and managing additional cash flow. Over to you, Sarah.
Great. Thanks for the introduction. So we can start by looking at the number of deals that have taken place within the Indian market. So India is the world's third largest manufacturer of drugs by volume and the largest exporter of formulations, accounting for 20% of the global exports. And according to the IPA, the Indian pharmaceutical industry is aspiring to reach $130 billion by 2030. India cannot take its position for granted as the pharmaceutical firms across the globe are targeting new markets in search of growth. Given the shrinking pipelines, complex regulatory processes, license and patent expirations, and tough competition from generic manufacturers. Over the last decade, the Indian pharmaceutical market has seen increasing domestic and foreign investment. And the graph here shows the number of deals that have taken place over the last 5 years. So the 2020 increase in deal-making activity that can be seen on this graph is likely to have been triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic. Interesting information on India's capabilities in the pharmaceutical industry during this time was revealed. Spiking COVID-19 cases in this year drove large pharmaceutical companies to strike deals to outsource clinical research and manufacturing of antiviral therapeutics and vaccines. Being the world's largest vaccine producer, India was an optimal market to pursue these agreements. However, contract service agreements were not the only type of deals that we saw an upward trends because of the pandemic. Strategic alliances, including license agreements and partnerships, also increased this year. And the deal landscape is changing and will continue changing substantially if the country continues shifting its focus from its generic industry to innovation. So overall, we are beginning to see much larger deals being made within the Indian pharmaceutical sector. There is a very clear direction towards consolidation and bigger deal sizes in the healthcare and pharmaceutical space in India. It's also worth mentioning the spike seen in 2020, the year of the COVID-19 pandemic, where we saw loads of collaboration amongst various pharma players across the globe, and that increased the leverage that each other had in their strengths to fulfill the unprecedented need for both innovation and keeping up with the huge surge in demand for the existing and new drugs. And global players such as Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, J&J, BioNTech, Lilly joined hands with many Indian pharma companies such as Serum Institute, Dr. Reddy's Laboratories, Zydus, Biocon, Cipla, and Sun Pharma, to name a few, for manufacturing their vaccines and drugs. Now we can move on to the next couple of slides where I'll be going over details of several deals that have been completed in recent years. So one of the big ones that really struck out was the deal that was made between Exelixis and Aurigene, which forged a cancer partnership for about $2.69 billion. In July 2019, Exelixis announced that it has entered into an exclusive collaboration, option and license agreement with Aurigene, the company that focuses on oncology and inflammatory disorders. The agreement gives Exelixis the opportunity to in-license as many as 6 programs from Aurigene, which has developed a focused approach to drug discovery that targets differentiated first-in-class and best-in-class opportunities with unique mechanism of actions. The deal is part of Exelixis' ongoing strategy to build an innovative pipeline. The companies announced that Exelixis has exercised its exclusive option for Aurigene's novel CDK7 inhibitor, and the company has now assumed responsibility for the future clinical development, commercialization, and global manufacturing of the compound. And the company has submitted an IND to the FDA to evaluate XL102 alone or in combination therapy for the treatment of inoperable, locally advanced, or metastatic solid tumors. There are currently 11 other assets in active development with the same MOA, all targeting solid unspecified tumors, including breast cancer, AML, liver cancer, and non-small cell lung cancer. Aurigene presented positive preclinical data, and Exelixis has also in-licensed the novel anti-cancer compound XL114 following the FDA's recent acceptance of its IND application. The company will soon initiate a phase 1 clinical trial evaluating this compound as a monotherapy in patients with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Moving on to another big deal, which was made between Mankind Pharma to buy Panacea's biotech's formulation business in India and Nepal. So Mankind Pharma entered into this deal to acquire its pharmaceutical formulation brands in India and Nepal, including related trademarks, copyrights, and other intellectual property, along with inventories for $254 million plus taxes. Panacea's domestic presence in this therapeutic segment, such as organ transplantation, diabetes, pain, cough, and cold. And Mankind is a key player in acute therapies and plans to derive 50% of its revenue from chronic segments by 2024. Moving on to the last deal that we're going to look at in detail, Biocon Biologics to acquire Viatris's biosimilars assets for up to $3.34 billion. And this was actually one of the biggest deals that we'd seen take place within the Indian market. So in February this year, Biocon Biologics acquired Viatris's biosimilars business to create a unique, fully integrated global biosimilars enterprise. Viatris will receive up to $3.35 billion, and Biocon Biologics will have a comprehensive portfolio comprising its current range of commercialized insulins, oncology, and immunology biosimilars, as well as several other biosimilar assets currently under development. The company also has access to vaccine portfolio through its previously announced partnership with Serum Institute Life Sciences. Combining Viatris's biosimilars business with Biocon will accelerate its commercial capabilities in developed markets, including the US, Europe, Canada, Japan, Australia, as well as New Zealand. And the deal provides strategic agility and operational efficiencies, which help Biocon Biologics mitigate pricing pressure in a competitive global biosimilars landscape. Moving on to the deal types that we've noticed over time. So the top 4 deals that actually took place over the past 5 years have been COVID licensing agreements, which I guess are no shock. And that obviously has taken place since 2020. Brand deals involving new modalities, which is something that's quite new in this region, and private equity buyouts, which is something that we're actually seeing an increase of in this region as well. I'll be highlighting some of the deals in each category over the next few slides. So first and foremost, we can start with the COVID-19 licensing agreements. So in terms of the vaccines, we had Dr. Reddy's, who partnered with the Russian Direct Investment Fund for clinical trials and supply of Sputnik in India. On April 13 of that year, the Drug Controller General of India had permitted the import of the vaccine for emergency use. And this was actually developed by a Russian company, Research Institute. And the go-ahead was based on results of its clinical trials in Russia, an interim of additional phase 3 local studies in India. We also had the Covishield, AstraZeneca's vaccine, and its domestic company, Bharat Biotech's Covaxin, which were also authorized for emergency use in India, with the government indicating more broadly its intent to fast-track emergency clearances for COVID-19 vaccines that had similar emergency use authorization from either the FDA, EMA, UK's MHRA, and Japan's PMDA, or those listed in the World Health Organization emergency use listing. There were also several Indian licensing agreements, and they included big companies such as Merck, Gilead, and Lilly. So Merck entered into a licensing agreement for Molnupiravir, which established Indian generic manufacturers. Merck entered into these agreements to accelerate availability of its therapy in India following approvals of emergency authorization by local regulatory agencies. And in response to, obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic, there was also Gilead, who provided its voluntary licensing partnerships with technical assistance support for the addition of new local manufacturing facilities and the donation of APIs to rapidly scale up production of remdesivir. This is a therapy that was approved in India for restricted emergency use for the treatment of COVID-19 in adults and children hospitalized with severe disease. In addition to providing support to its licensees to expand the local manufacturing capacity, Gilead also donated at least 450,000 vials to help address the immediate needs. Last but not least, Lilly also announced new initiatives to help the COVID-19 patients in India as part of its commitment to bring full force of its scientific and medical experts to attack the pandemic around the world. Lilly also offered donations of baricitinib to Indian government through direct relief, while simultaneously working with local Indian pharmaceutical companies to execute royalty-free voluntary licensing agreements to accelerate the manufacturing and distribution of medicines, of which baricitinib tablets were being made immediately available for hospitalized patients with COVID-19. Moving on to branded deals. So Dr. Reddy's made a deal to market certain brands of Novartis therapies. The legacy brands included Vovaran range, the calcium range, and Methergine, for which Novartis India has recently announced an exclusive agreement with Dr. Reddy's for, in both a distribution, which actually currently accounts for around 31% of its revenue. This would give a strong advantage to Dr. Reddy's in terms of expanding market presence in certain categories such as pain and gynecology. Mankind also acquired second brands of Novartis's Entresto, which is a heart failure therapy. The privately owned company has also acquired the generics business of Panacea in India and Nepal for over $255 million. The company will market and distribute products under brand Neptaz, and Novartis will actually manufacture this. Torrent and Mankind acquired selected brands of Dr. Reddy's as well. So Torrent Pharmaceuticals actually entered into this agreement to acquire 4 of its brands for an undisclosed amount. The brands are Stiptiviat E, Finance, and Dynapress to further expand its reach into gynecology and urology. Cipla also acquired brand names and trademarks of Vysavive and Vysavive M from Novartis. The company has been co-marketing this drug in agreement with Novartis under the brand names and has witnessed the strong uptake of the product in India for the last couple of years. It is currently available across the country, and there have been many more brand deals that have taken place, some of which can be seen on your screens. Next, moving on to new modalities. So new focus and advancements in the development of cell and gene therapies have been made, and we can see some of the deals in our screens now. So Laris Labs acquired 27% of ImmunoAct, which are several CAR T therapy assets under various development stages for the treatment of multiple autoimmune and oncology indications. And there have been other new modalities that have also been investigated and have started being in development in this region. And then moving on to the private equity deals that we have seen. Now, this is actually very interesting given that this is an area where historically there has not been much presence in. However, recently over the past few years, we've actually seen more private equity buyout deals take place within the India region. And we actually expect this to continue developing and rising as time goes on. So US private equity giant KKR has agreed to acquire 54% of the JB Chemicals and Pharmaceuticals business. This will pick up controlling stake in the Mumbai-based branded formulation player. And according to some sources, including the BSE, this particular agreement to acquire a 41.7 million equity share promotes the company to continue launching its chemicals and actual investments in the past 2 months. So moving on, we can see the other types of private equity buyouts that have also taken place. Advent International agreed to also acquire a controlling stake in ZCL Chemicals and Bharat Serums and vaccines. And the Carlyle Group acquired 20% of Piramal Pharma's business for over $500 million. So we've actually seen a large number of private equity buyout deals more recently. And as I mentioned earlier, we are expecting this to continue increasing over the next few years. But this will be a very interesting type of deal to keep an eye out for, as we're expecting the private equity firms coming into this region to change the way the pharmaceutical businesses in India can actually become more innovative and become bigger key players globally, and maybe challenge some of the big pharma players that we're currently familiar with. Looking ahead, India's domestic pharmaceutical market stood at $42 billion in 2021 and is likely to reach $65 billion by 2024 and further grow to reach about $120 billion by 2030. And it is expected that there will be continued growth in the number of deals done in this region, including the new trend of private equity firms investing in India-based pharmaceutical companies. However, the opportunities do exist for the Indian pharmaceutical industry to continue moving up the value chain by expanding beyond generics. And this is something that we've already seen, and I'm sure we're going to see this continue with exploring opportunities in biosimilars and new chemical and biological entities as well as new modalities such as cell and gene therapy. Thank you so much for listening. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Binu Philip, who will continue the rest of this presentation.
Binu, let me do a quick introduction.
Sure.
It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Binu Philip, who leads the Business Development Division at Zydus Research Center, which is the R&D wing of Zydus Life Sciences Limited, based out of Ahmedabad, India. Binu is responsible for licensing, partnerships, alliance management, and R&D portfolio management with a focus on new chemical entities, new biological entities, biologics, and vaccines to treat a variety of disease conditions like inflammation, oncology, diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular, infectious diseases, and rare diseases. Thank you very much, Binu, and over to you.
Thanks, Sridhar, and thanks, Sarah, for a very excellent presentation. So if you look at the Indian pharmaceutical space over the past couple of decades, what we understand very clearly is that India has now entered the era of innovation. And if we divide the past 3 decades into three different phases, like the years starting from 1990s to 2000, we can broadly classify those as the R&D institutes phase, because that was the time when India entered the product patent regime, and several pharmaceutical majors set up R&D labs, including the likes of Dr. Reddy's, Glenmark, Intas, Lupin, Orchid, Piramal, Ranbaxy, Zydus, Biocons, and others. What then followed was a era of intensive innovation coming out from India, and this is what we broadly classify as a capability building phase, where we saw several global pharmaceutical and biotech companies forging alliances and collaborations with Indian pharmaceutical companies to access innovation from India. And what we have seen is companies of the like of Novartis, Novo Nordisk, Forest, Merck, Sanofi, Lilly, or for that matter, Takeda, Boehringer Ingelheim, AbbVie, and others. They had established several collaborations to access candidates in oncology, in inflammation, in pain, metabolic disorders from Indian pharmaceutical companies. What we also saw during this phase was there were large pharmaceutical R&D centers being set up in India. There were also build, operate, transfer kind of models being set up in India. We also witnessed very large global CROs, including the likes of IQVIA, then Quintiles, or Paraxel, and others, setting up offices and back offices in India. And we also saw several biotech set up alliances to access innovations in India. But then came in the year 2011 to 22, was the most important phase, the goal with which several pharmaceutical companies in India had initiated the R&D institutes, that was to make medicines. And we saw our first medicine that was invented in India in a pharmaceutical R&D center, saroglitazar magnesium, reaching the patients in India. Today we have, like over the several years, more than 72 plus scientific publications citing saroglitazar magnesium. And interestingly, the molecule is under late-stage clinical evaluation for primary biliary cholangitis, a rare indication in the US, as well as NASH indication in US and Europe. We have received orphan drug designation from the US FDA, EMA for PBC, and as well as a fast-track designation from the US FDA for PBC. On the other hand, we also saw companies like Wokhard, they're successfully developing an antibacterial candidate all the way from discovery to the market. We also saw a second molecule coming out from Zydus's R&D lab, desidustat, which was again discovered in India and developed all the way to the market in India. We also saw different kind of models where the early stage in licensing happened from different R&D labs across the world, and Indian pharmaceutical companies were able to develop it all the way to the market and launch in India as a first market. So one example was that of Sun Pharma or Ranbaxy, which developed atenolol malate, and the other example was that of Zydus, which developed rabies monoclonal antibody. In fact, it's a twin wrap. It includes rabies monoclonal antibody cocktail. So these are some of the significant examples of where the Indian pharmaceutical companies headed going into the next couple of decades. And I think you heard from the previous speaker that the PVC investments in India have been rising. Now, if you look at the figure right from 2010, the last decade, 2010 all the way to 2020, you can see a significant manifold increase in the investments that have come from PE and VC into the pharmaceutical industry in India. And this number has again increased in the year 21-22. Now, all this signifies that there is a huge potential in the Indian pharmaceutical space, and the potential is there because India has been traditionally known as a global manufacturing hub. But then we have also added up capabilities in terms of both data digital as well as capabilities in doing clinical trials. In fact, several large pharmaceutical companies, they're sourcing close to 30% of their global clinical data from India. We also have very strong IPR protection capabilities in India. And of course, a very strong policy which favors R&D, which favors regulatory policies and incentives, and very strong policy to govern data and digitalization. And last but not the least, and one of the most important point is the human resource that the country has in terms of its institutes, the world's leading institutes like the IITs, the NIPERS, the AIMS, the Indian Institute of Science, the CDRIs, NCL, and the list is endless. And we have very high quality infrastructure and a very strong IT support system as well in India. So we heard from the previous speaker, and that's the statement of the IP as well, that Indian domestic pharma market stood at close to 42 billion in 2021 and is likely to reach 65 billion in 2024, with further growth to reach 120 to 130 billion by 2030. So we are thinking of not a minuscule, but a quantum leap in growth. And if you compare this number, 130 billion or 42 billion in 2021, to the numbers globally, the global pharmaceutical industry was, say, close to 1,424 billion. So, to put this in context, and if you look at the top 10 global pharmaceutical companies, now each of them have a revenue of, say, close to approximately 40 billion plus. And if you look at the R&D investments of each of these companies, they have invested in total close to 108 billion US dollars in R&D. So we also heard that growth opportunities exist for Indian pharmaceutical industry in NCs and NBs, and this is the area where we need to target. We need to work together with all the global pharmaceutical majors as well as biotech institutes to actually be able to develop NCs and Bs for the marketplace. At the same time, we know that the path to a new drug is long, it's risky, it's time consuming, and it is expensive. And if we put this in perspective, if you look at the 2021 new drug approvals in the US, the majority of the approvals came in the oncology indication, followed closely by the rare diseases, and there were close to 5 each in inflammation and infection space and genetic disorders. But then the most interesting aspect is here that 19 of those drugs that were developed and approved were developed by big pharma. But then if you look at the number here, there were close to 31 drugs that were developed by mid-size and biotech companies. Now, what does this signify? This signifies that the model is getting disrupted. You are having large number of funding sources in terms of angel investors, in terms of VC capital, in terms of PE money, hedge funds, government organizations, foundations. You have family offices, you have biotechs, and you have the expertise of large pharma that are out there to support drug development. Another interesting aspect here is if you look at the USA life sciences VC deal activity, what we are observing here is that USA, you had a close to 46 billion US dollars being invested by the VC community into drug development and pharmaceutical companies. So this clearly signifies that there is a huge potential if you are to focus on NCs and NBs. The next section, we will look into disruptive innovation in particular, and how would it differentiate from incremental innovation, and what is the role of strategic partnership. So one glaring example here is that of Sofosbuvir. So before Sofosbuvir was introduced way back in 2013, way back in the year 1991, we had interferons alpha, which and the science progressed into interferon alpha 2A to interferon plus ibavirin to PEG interferon, but we were able to achieve only 58% to 62% survival in Hep C virus infection. But then the real disruptive innovation happened with Sofosbuvir and follow-on compounds. But interestingly, a great alliance happened where Sofosbuvir was acquired via a $11 billion acquisition by Pharma by Gilead way back in November 2011. And in the year 2015, this drug was able to reach sales of close to 19 billion US dollar in the year 2015. So what does this signify? I think if you are alert to new innovations that are happening, and if you're able to enter into strategic partnerships, there is a huge potential to create disruptive innovation and bring disruptive innovation to the marketplace, and thereby we will be able to serve patients. Next, if you look at the drug discovery and development phase, we know that it's risky, it's time consuming, but then the question would come, what is the right stage to partner and with whom should we be partnering? So if you look at the investment phase, it may range from 8 to 12 years in some of the best case scenarios, and in some worst case scenarios, it might extend beyond 14 years as well to bring a new drug to the marketplace. And at each phase, there is a probability of success. Say, for example, if you look at the phase 2, which is broadly classified as the value of death in the pharmaceutical industry, you have a probability of success broadly of say close to 29%, means that close to 70% of the drugs would be failing in phase 2. And even after NDA, there is a 9% probability of failure. So, and we have to ensure that there is enough of a patent life left to get a return on investment. So the question we have before us is, what is the probability of regulatory and technical success for each discovery project or development project that we are working on? And what is the risk adjusted NPV, the risk adjusted net present value of the candidate? Now, to dwell into this further, one has to ask the question that how can we reduce the risk of attrition in drug development? So we can look into two seminal publications here. So the first publication is is looking into the data of 4 major pharmaceutical companies, and this depicts some of the reasons for failure at candidate stage. And interestingly, what we see is that, say for example, 40% of the drugs at the candidate stage were not developed because they failed clinical testing. But then interestingly, 32% were not developed because the developer rationalized portfolio, and close to 7% were not developed because of commercial reasons. So there is a clear chance, I think close to 40% of drugs won't be developed because of portfolio prioritization or commercial reasons. At the same time, there is this another publication which looked at the reasons for failure at phase 2 stage. And what we clearly see is that close to 18 plus 13, say close to approximately 30% of drugs are dropped, not because of safety or efficacy, but because of lack of value proposition or because the company decides to exit a particular disease area. So with this background, let's move into a couple of successful case studies of drug development from India in India. So the one particular example on the new biology entity front, especially because we heard that the way to go would be to develop NBEs and NCEs. So looking at NBE front, way back in the year 2009, Zydus and WHO entered a collaboration to develop a next generation biologics to fight rabies. And as we all know, rabies is 100% fatal. So if you look at the situation before 2020, what we understand is that there were human risks of human origin as well as equine of animal origin, but they carried the risk of infections, they were expensive, and they were available in confidential quantities. Whereas after the year 2020, once the rabies monoclonal antibody cocktail data was published and the monoclonal antibody was approved by the Indian regulatory authorities, we were able to launch TwinRab into the market, which was able to help patients having dog bites in particular. So if you look at how this molecule got developed, it was a long journey from the year 2009 to 2020. And it included several aspects of drug development, including cell line development, significant non-clinical safety evaluation, a huge investment into clinical evaluation, analytical expertise, as well as it required commercial manufacturing capabilities. And we were able to do that because we were able to look at it from a long-term perspective in terms of completing the preclinical studies, initiating the phase 1 trials, doing the phase 2 trials, looking into large phase 3 trial requirements, as well as getting the approval in India. And in the process, we also received an orphan drug designation from the US FDA for this product. And eventually the drug was approved and launched in India as TwinRab, which contains 2 monoclonal antibodies. It's docaravimab and miromab. The second case study that we would like to discuss here is the aspect of new chemical entities, and this is the example of desidustat. So this is in the field of ESAs. So as you are all aware, I think if you look at the situation pre-22, ESAs were first approved and reimbursed way back in the 1980s, and there are still very high unmet medical needs. And if you look at this space, ESAs globally were able to make a sale of say close to 120 billion during the period of 2001 to 2021. And you can see there is a huge quantum of sales over the last 2 decades. But then there were incremental innovations after Epogen was first introduced, with the Dabopoetin coming in as a once weekly version and Mircera, which was introduced as once a month version. But then the real disruptive innovation happened when the Nobel Prize in Chemistry was awarded way back in 2019 for the discoveries of how cells sense and adapt to oxygen availability. And this gave new ideas to the researchers that if you are able to develop a oral HIF pH inhibitor, it could have potential advantages over injectable ESAs, which could be a small molecule, it could be stored at room temperature, it could be given orally, there would be low risk of immunogenicity, or it could address endogenous production of EPO. It may be able to reduce hepcidin, it may be able to reduce inflammation or reduce the need of IV iron. So with this hypothesis, we initiated our program way back in the year 2012. We were able to identify a candidate and then do the laborious process of bringing it through IND enabling preclinical studies. The phase 1 studies were completed in Australia, and we had to do a lot of CMC drug development related activities. This was followed by clinical trials, POC clinical trials in chronic kidney disease patients, uh, followed by large phase 3 trials involving close to 1,000 plus patients. So, in the overall clinical development journey till date, we have exposed this molecule to close to 1,200 subjects, which is one of the largest clinical trial of its kind in India. In the year 22, we received our first approval for launch in India, and we were able to launch this drug successfully in India for the benefit of the patients, for thousands of patients living with chronic kidney disease induced anemia. In fact, in addition to that, we have now also initiated a DREAM CKD phase 4 trial, which will enroll 1,004 patients in India, including 502 dialysis dependent and 502 dialysis independent CKD patients with anemia. Meanwhile, we have also initiated clinical development in the US for chemotherapy induced anemia indication. We also entered into a partnership with CMS Pharma to develop this candidate in China, Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan, which are where again I think there are thousands of patients who would need access to an oral HIF pH inhibitor. And when the COVID was at its peak, we also developed this in phase 2 trials in COVID-induced ARDS indications. So this was the entire journey, and during the process, as a responsible pharmaceutical company, we also published our data in various reputed international journals as well as medical journals, including the American Journal of Nephrology, where we published the 2 phase 3 clinical trial data. So this was an intensive research and development effort, including scientists, including clinicians, as well as patients, and several regulators as well, to get this drug approved for the benefit of patients in India. So, with this background showing that we can actually develop NCs and NBs and repeat the process over and over again, let's move on to the advantages of partnering. Now, as you will all understand, there are several advantages of partnering, which gives you access to a technology. One does not have to build from scratch. There is a relatively smaller investment with high return on capital investment that can be expected. It saves both time and cost involved in drug development. It quickens the market entry. You can actually diversify a portfolio. It helps companies to expand their capabilities, whereas establishing a new vertical. and it also helps expand the territorial reach. And this is the sweetest way of for reaching more and more patients across the globe. So next we will move into how we will envisage a partnering process. So partnering process would first begin with identifying an opportunity, then moving into evaluation, negotiation, doing a detailed due diligence, and then moving into deal signature. But it does not end there, because most of the alliances might fail after the deal is signed. So one has to focus on deal execution, one has to focus on alliance management to fully realize the value of the asset. And the thing that would help everybody in the process is having a win-win mindset, building trust with the partnering organization or the clinicians or the foundations with whom we are working, having complete commitment and flexibility on both sides, as well as being creative to help reach the drug to the patients who need it the most. So here are some strategies for actually de-risking drug development by using deals and strategic partnerships. So one can either think of licensing as an option, or one can think of entering into a merger and acquisition kind of a arrangement. There could be a third option, which would be related to fundraising, either through an IPO or through VCs or PE investments. There could be an option to spin off the company into a new entity, or you can think of making a wholly owned subsidiary, or it could be a strategic alliance where you distribute the activities. Say, for example, one would be responsible for manufacturing, or you will be taking, somebody would be responsible for clinical trials, or so on and so forth. So the next key aspect is due diligence, because it's very key to successful agreements, both in terms of risk assessment as well as mitigation. So before entering into any licensing agreement, one should ensure that the due diligence is perfectly done, especially when it relates to new chemical entities, biologics, or vaccines, in terms of CMC, in terms of pharmacology, mechanism of action, toxicology, safety, clinical, regulatory, statistics, commercial, IP, and also in terms of value and access requirements of a particular country. So depending on the type of deal that one would choose from, it may range from taking on certain amount of funding, or getting into co-development or merger and acquisition. But the key difference would be the ownership that would be either shared, or are you looking at full ownership of the asset or the company. So once the due diligence is done and the deal is signed, the role of the alliance management would come in to actually realize the value of the asset. So here it is very important to have commitment to the alliance, the common vision between both companies, or maybe in some cases more than one or two or three companies. Building trust between the organization, having an effective means of communication. It's very important to have a close relationship, as well as regularly monitoring the health of relationship. Finally, it's very important to be flexible for changes in relationship or people that might happen. Having clearly defined roles and responsibilities, creation of project teams, creation of a joint steering committee, as well as being committed to share the best practices and being open to learn from partners. So this is very important skill that one must have to realize value and bring drugs onto the marketplace. Finally, in terms of the R&D ecosystem, and what the Indian Pharmaceutical Alliance believes is, one should have an enabling regulatory landscape. One should have a robust funding support, both from government as well as VC, investments, as well as one should have strong linkages with academia and industry. One should have a favorable policy landscape, and of course, a high quality infrastructure, both in terms of innovation as well as manufacturing and clinical development to accelerate collaboration. So with this, I come to my last slide. And if you look at the Indian pharmaceutical space, if you look at the kind of innovations that have happened in India over the past couple of decades, and if you look at the number of companies, and this is only a representative list having capabilities across the drug discovery, development, manufacturing, and commercial ecosystem, what we see is that there are several companies that are out there offering services in terms of drug discovery development, offering candidates in terms of IND stage candidates. Some companies, they have having capabilities in terms of taking a molecule all the way to human POC. Others have capabilities to to offer clinical development services. There are companies of the like of Zydus and others who have capabilities, who have established capabilities across the drug discovery, development, manufacturing, and commercial ecosystem, and have been able to take a molecule all the way to the marketplace. And this has been possible because of the commitment and long-term vision of the founders of such companies. So with this, thank you everybody for patient listening, and we believe there will be much better days and for Indian pharmaceuticals to come, and we'll be able to serve more and more patients across the globe. Thank you.
Thank you, Binu, for a wonderful presentation. Thank you to both the speakers, Sarah and Binu, for excellent and informative presentations. We now open the floor for questions. So if I may request all the participants to put in their questions in the chat box. There is an icon of ask a question, and you can just fill in your question there, and I'll be able to request the speaker to answer those for you. While you are putting in the questions, let me get started with a first question for Sarah. Sarah, in your understanding of the R&D partnership space, which of the big pharma companies do you think are the best partners in terms of the collaborations that they have done, and also in terms of the innovative aspects of the collaborations that they have done?
That's a great question, but I think that's also quite a difficult question to answer. There's many different criteria that should be considered when considering an ideal partner or collaborator. And I think when considering collaborations and partnerships with bigger pharmaceutical companies, it's essential that you're aware of the support that is needed to increase and expedite your development processes, but also understand the capabilities that potential partner or collaborator could bring in. And, different companies have had different success rates in different indications, targets, modalities, and it's essential to understand a pharmaceutical company's priorities and capabilities before approaching them regarding a partnership or a collaboration. I guess as an example, in oncology, we could consider Pfizer, Roche, and BMS as the top three players who have had the most experience in terms of the most number of assets in development within anti-cancer therapies. However, if we look to understand the company who's had the most success in a target such as PD-1s in oncology, then Merck would be the company that stands out the most. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that it's essential that different factors such as current and future priorities, as well as indication targets and support, both in terms of development and commercialization capabilities, are considered when aiming to make successful partnerships. I hope that answers that question.
Thank you, Sarah. I think, yes, that was an excellent answer to the question. My next question is to you, Binu. Translation of innovative pharma from academia to the bedside is time-consuming and requires an industry partner to commercialize it. How best and effectively can industry and academia collaborate to ensure A, a long-standing partnership, B, see that the innovative R&D reaches fruition, and what do you consider would be the role of each of those partners for this successful translation?
That's a very good question, Sridhar. So as we all know, academia is very essential in setting foundation of strong talent and research base, especially in basic research. And we need a translation from academia and industry for both research as well as human capital. So if you're looking at the academia and industry collaborations, the most important point where both can collaborate is translating an idea from concept to the clinic, and where the pharmaceutical industries can bring in their expertise would be in terms of manufacturing, in terms of regulatory support, as well as clinical development, to actually see the if the idea is translated, how we can reach the patients better. So in the process, you need a very open and constructive relationship between both academia and industry, because we know that there is a huge uh, probability of failure happening in, especially in when we are looking at new drug discovery and development. But at the same time, it gives us access to go back to the drawing board and looking at ideas and seeing what has actually succeeded or why certain things have failed. If you have a very open collaboration existing between pharmaceutical companies and as well as research institutes, and like I showed you in one of the examples where we work together with the WHO collaborating centers to actually take a cocktail of monoclonal antibodies, being able to select two out of them and being able to develop a monoclonal antibody cocktail and getting the product approved through the regulatory agencies after having completed clinical trials and having published in several internationally reputed journals. So that's a way to go forward.
Thanks, Binu. I think this next question is for both Sarah and you, Binu, and maybe Sarah, you can give the first answer. Uh, while there have been numerous collaborations or partnerships that have happened between Indian companies in the generic space, why haven't we seen such collaborations happen in the new chemical entity or the new biological entity space?
I think that's a great question, and I don't think anyone would be able to give the exact reason for it. I think we can all make our assumptions based on, the trends that we've identified. I think the reality of it is, and there is data to support this, that more recently there have been much more difficult for companies to actually get investments and partnerships from bigger pharma companies. And this is something that we've even noticed in the EU compared to, what happens in the US. Typically, biotechs in the US actually get more investment. We see more partnerships being made with those companies and the bigger pharma companies than we do in any other region. But I think that is something that is changing. I think that could be a reason of the fact that maybe those biotechs tend to be more present at different conferences, especially those partnering conferences. And I think we are now seeing a rise in that. But I think if we're focusing on, India on its own, my personal opinion would be that the new innovations is something that we've seen more recently. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic really did impact the pharmaceutical sector. And I think India managed to show how incredibly well they can work with the bigger pharma companies in aiding with the development of drugs. And I think that is a lesson that probably everyone has learned. And I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot more partnerships within those regions for more innovative products. But this is also something that I think in that region is also increasing. I think historically there was less innovative companies in that region, and we have seen a trend towards a rise in that. And I'm sure as that increases, so will be the interest of the big pharma companies.
Thank you, Sarah.
So
Binu, you want to take a dig at it as well?
yeah, I personally don't agree with that comment, because we have seen collaborations also between Indian pharmaceutical companies as well as Indian companies and academia. And we are seeing a plethora of small biotechs coming out from India, and a lot of startups coming out from India who have been approaching a lot of other Indian pharmaceutical companies. And there have been a lot of collaborations between large pharmaceutical companies in India as well as between Indian pharmaceutical companies and smaller biotechs as well, because we are agonistic to where the innovation is coming from. It can come from any part of the world. Our aim is to develop drugs for the benefit of the patients, and if we see the right opportunity, we are willing to collaborate despite from where the opportunity is coming from.
Wonderful. Thank you, Binu. Next question is also for you. How do you compare the cost of acquisition of a molecule as compared to developing it by yourself within the organization?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So looking at the cost of acquisition versus developing it internally, again, I think as I answered earlier, it all depends on what is the incremental value or benefit we are able to give to the patient, and if it meets the criteria, if you're able to develop a good medicine for the patients, it won't matter whether a molecule is coming from internal research or is being sourced externally.
Okay.
And
So,
regarding the cost of acquisition, again, I think it all depends on the merit of the molecule. That's what we would say.
thanks, Binu. Sarah, the next question for you. In your evaluation of the startup ecosystems across the globe, how would you rate the Indian startup ecosystem as it is today? And how do you see partnerships evolving between the Indian startup ecosystem and the Indian pharma companies, not only the pharma majors from across the world?
I think that's a very difficult one for me to answer. Um, I think what we have seen is a large increase in the deals that are taking place, both within um, Indian companies working with other Indian companies or international companies working with the Indian companies, and I think that will continue to increase over time. In terms of the startups, I think. Um, I mean, being a startup is difficult regardless of, the region that you're in, but depending on the idea, the target, the unmet needs that it could potentially address, I think that's when you start to see points of differentiation from, your particular compound to what's out there. I think the key thing being a startup, regardless of where you are, is being able to understand exactly the risks that are associated with your asset, but also understand the points of differentiation and have that in an unbiased way where when you are actually getting ready to have meetings with potential collaborators and partners, be able to benchmark the value of your asset and not get pushbacks as much as we typically see. And that usually happens when you've got a very good understanding of the risks associated, but also have a very good understanding of the potential unmet needs and the potential symptoms or cure of a given disease. I think once you've got a good understanding of that, you can probably benchmark yourself against what's already out there, and be able to get a good value when you are working with either collaborating with a company or out licensing that particular asset.
Thanks, Sarah. Binu, one other question for you. Where do you see the investments from the Indian pharma companies coming in the new biological entity space, especially given the cost of development of a new biological entity being far greater than that of a new chemical entity?
Yeah, I think the development of entity, be it a biologic or a chemical entity, it depends on the therapeutic area and the amount of clinical trials that have to be done, as well as the manufacturing that is involved. And the investments for either the small molecule or a large molecule could come in different kinds of spaces. It could be either from P, VC, or internal company accrual. So it all depends on the balance sheet of the company that is actually developing the asset and the priority for that organization. It's very clear that if you want to grow and if you have a growth mindset to achieve the target of 130 billion that the IP has set for itself, companies will have to either today or tomorrow start investing in R&D. And once you have the right molecule, the investments would keep on flowing because then you clearly understand the risk, you clearly understand the benefits that it can give to the patients, and there could be a solid case for drug development.
Thank you, Binu. I just want to be cognizant of time, and I'll have one final question for you, Binu. Given your experience with the WHO, how can the international government agencies forge partnerships with an Indian pharma company to support the Make in India initiative?
Yeah, that's an excellent question because the Indian government is clearly supporting Make in India. And what we need to understand here is that India has sizable capabilities, not only in terms of Make in India, whereas we also have now capabilities of discovering in India. So we can actually help other foreign institutions to develop their drugs that have come from their academia, be it coming from Australia, be it coming from US, Europe, or for that matter, Argentina, Brazil, or any part of the world. I think if the innovation meets the development criteria, we can actually step in and help them manufacture, make, or even help them to take their ideas from concept to POC, or and help them bring the drug to the patients.
Thank you, Binu. Thank you, Sarah, for patiently taking the questions. Uh, I think we need to, we are over time right now. And I'd like to conclude the session by thanking all the participants and the questions from the participants that have been asked have been really pointed and directed towards eliciting a fantastic response from the speakers, both Binu and Sarah. So thank you very much for your presentations and for the patient answering of the questions. Thank you all once again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.